Find a comfortable position. Let your body settle without hurry. There is nowhere to go now and nothing you need to hold in place. The day can remain exactly as it is for a little while longer. The light does not need to soften all at once. The warmth does not need to leave. You only need to let yourself arrive here, one quiet moment at a time. Today's story is called Resting in the Orchard While the Bees Drift By. The orchard does not announce itself from a great distance. It is simply there when the afternoon has ripened enough for it. Rows of fruit trees holding their branches in the warm light, patches of shade laid gently across short grass, and air that already seems to have been moving through leaves and blossom for hours before you came near it. Nothing about the place feels hurried. Nothing presses itself forward. It belongs to the day in the same unforced way the day belongs to itself. By the time you reach the first trees, your pace has already loosened a little. Not enough to be noticed at once. Only enough that the body is no longer moving with the faint forward pull of getting somewhere else. The warmth on your shoulders remains even. It rests along your arms and across the upper part of your chest where the light still finds you. The grass at the orchard's edge is shorter than meadow grass, more settled underfoot, with small dry places between the greener blades where the afternoon has been lying longest. Somewhere beyond the nearest branches, the day continues in its fuller brightness. Here, at the edge of the orchard, it begins to break into a gentler measure. A bee passes somewhere nearby, not close enough to disturb you, only near enough for its small drifting sound to be heard for a moment as it moves through the warm air, and then away again, not sharply, not insistently, but with the same ordinary belonging as light between leaves or the faint movement of shadow over grass. The sound does not ask to be followed. It does not linger after it has gone. It simply lets the orchard introduce itself in its own language. You keep walking. The trees stand far enough apart that the afternoon can still move between them. Their branches do not close the sky away. They gather it instead, holding the light in smaller pieces, letting it fall across the grass, the lower trunks, and the spaces between in softened patterns that shift too easily to be called still, but never become busy enough to demand notice. Here and there pale blossom remains among the leaves, and in some places a few loosened petals have already come down, lying lightly on the grass as if they arrived there without interrupting anything. The orchard has its own kind of abundance, not lush in a way that overwhelms the eye, not so carefully arranged that it feels ornamental, only quietly full. Leaves, branches, grass, the faint sweetness that lingers in the warmed air without thickening it, the small life moving among the trees, and the sense that all of it has been going on for some time already, and will go on just as easily after you stop thinking about it. The place does not need to be admired to feel complete. It only needs to be entered slowly enough that the body can learn its pace. Another bee passes, farther off this time. You hear it not as a single bright sound, but as a thread crossing somewhere among the branches before thinning back into the orchard's wider hush. Then nothing. Then only the held warmth of the afternoon again, the grass underfoot, the light shifting in narrow places between leaves. The body does not tense around the sound. That is what matters. It learns almost at once that the bees here are part of the day, not interruptions in it. You move between the first trees and then a few more beyond them. The ground changes only slightly as you go, but enough for the feet to notice. One patch is more springing where the grass is thicker. Another is firmer where the earth lies nearer the surface. In some places, the shade lies broader and cooler in appearance, though the warmth of the afternoon still remains in the air above it. In others, the light reaches farther down and turns the grass paler at the tips. The orchard is not one single condition repeated over and over. It keeps offering small variations without ever asking you to choose between them yet. The sound of a bee returns, nearer again. It passes somewhere to one side, then ahead, then is gone before you have any reason to turn your head towards it. There is something soothing in that very lack of demand. The orchard is alive, but not in a way that requires your response. Things move, small sounds pass through the warm air. Blossom and leaf hold the day in their own patient way. Yet none of it presses against the body hard enough to disturb the slower rhythm already beginning to take hold. Your steps grow quieter, not because the grass muffles them completely, but because your attention has come closer in. You do not need to look far ahead. The orchard gives enough from one small stretch to the next, one tree then another, one patch of shade, one brighter place between branches, one passing bee sound, then the calm after it. The day no longer feels broad in the same way it did outside. It has started to gather itself into smaller, easier portions. The branches above hold light differently from the olive grove. There, the shade had a drier, older quality to it, silvered and spare. Here, the orchard softens the afternoon another way. Light moves through leaves and blossom with a more living gentleness, as though the air itself has been sweetened only slightly by passing through so many branches. The grass below answers with its own quiet texture, short enough not to brush heavily against the ankles, soft enough to take the foot without resistance, firm enough beneath that the body never loses its trust in the ground. Somewhere farther in, a cluster of bees can be heard for a little while among the trees. Not loud, not concentrated in one place strongly enough to call it a center. Only a faint, warm-threaded hum entering and leaving the edge of hearing as if the orchard were continuing some small, ordinary labor of its own without needing to bring you into it. The sound does not sharpen the air. It rounds it. It makes the stillness feel inhabited rather than empty. That may be the orchard's first real gift, not silence, but a kind of life gentle enough that it leaves rest undisturbed. You pass beneath a branch where the light breaks more finely for a moment, scattering small moving patches across the grass before joining itself again in broader pieces beyond. A few petals lie caught in the greener parts below, pale against the darker shade. The trunk nearby is ridged and quietly solid, its bark less ancient in feeling than the olive trees, but no less steady for that. Fruit is beginning somewhere in the orchard, though not close enough here to insist on itself. What reaches you most is not the fruit, not even the blossom exactly, but the warm orchard air that has moved through both and carries only the faintest trace of them onward. Your breathing settles into the place without effort. It does not deepen dramatically. It simply stops behaving as though anything more immediate is required. The shoulders no longer hold the outer day at full distance. The eyes stop scanning ahead in any active way. The hands have nothing to do and so begin to feel quieter by themselves. It is the kind of slowing that happens when the body realizes it is in the company of something non-urgent and begins, almost politely, to match it. A bee drifts through the air ahead, visible for just a moment, not close enough to matter as detail, only close enough to let sound and movement belong together for a second before both are gone again into the branches and light. The body does not brace. It does not follow. It lets the bee pass as it lets the light pass, as it lets the afternoon remain what it is. You go a little farther in. The orchard opens and gathers at the same time. The spaces between trees feel easy to move through, yet certain patches begin to hold themselves more quietly than others. One part of the grass lies flatter. Another rests under steadier shade. A little farther on, the light seems softer where it reaches the ground, less interrupted, as though the branches there have fallen into a gentler balance between openness and cover. You do not think of any of this as choosing yet. The body is simply beginning to register, where the day seems easiest to rest inside. The bees continue in their own drifting way. One passes somewhere behind you now, its sound thinning almost before it is fully heard. Another seems farther off among blossom and leaves. Then for a while there is none at all, only the orchard itself. Grass underfoot, the mild warmth held in the air, a leaf shifting overhead, petals resting where they have fallen, the quiet continuity of branches holding the afternoon up and around you. That absence matters as much as the sound. It means the orchard is not built on repetition in any strict sense. The bees do not arrive on cue. They pass, they recede, they disappear for a while, and in doing so, they teach the body something useful. Nothing here needs to be anticipated. Sound may come or not come. Light may brighten one patch of grass and leave another in softer shade. A breath of warmer air may move between the trees and then be gone. The body no longer needs to prepare itself for any of it. It can simply remain. Ahead, one part of the orchard begins to feel quieter than the rest. Not silent, not more beautiful in any obvious way, only easier. A tree a little broader than the others nearby. A patch of grass beneath it that lies in a more settled balance of shade and light. A place where the air seems to have been resting a little longer, and where the passing bees, when they do drift by, seem less like visitors than part of the day moving through its own untroubled pattern. Nothing calls attention to this patch directly. It only continues to feel truer each time your eyes pass over it. You do not go to it at once. The orchard still needs a little more time to be learned from within before the body commits itself to one exact place. But the possibility of rest has already changed shape. It is no longer abstract, no longer the general idea of lying down somewhere in shade. It has started to gather around one real part of the orchard, one patch of grass and branch-held light, and warm blossom air that seems to ask for no improvement before it receives you. You move between two more trees, and the sound of a bee crosses lightly from one side of the orchard to the other. Then nothing again. Then only the leaves. The grass here feels particularly even underfoot. Not soft in a way that gives too far, not wild enough to tangle at the ankles, only springing a little above the steadier earth below. The kind of ground that suggests it could hold a blanket easily. The kind of place where the body might lower itself without any struggle against the surface it meets. The thought does not yet fully form, but its shape is already there. The afternoon has become non-urgent enough now that the idea of rest no longer feels like a change of plan. It feels like the natural next thing. The bees have helped with that, not by soothing in any deliberate way, but by passing often enough and lightly enough that their sound has become proof of the orchard's harmless continuance. They drift by, then they are elsewhere, they return, then the air is empty of them again. Through all of it, the trees remain, the grass remains, the shade remains. The body learns, without needing to say so, that it is in a place where small life continues and still nothing is required of it. You slow a little more. One hand hangs quiet at your side. The face is no longer holding itself in a bright expression. The eyes move from one tree to the next, then to the grass beneath them, then farther in where that steadier patch still seems to wait without drawing you in too quickly. Everything about the orchard suggests that rest, when it comes, will not need to be taken. It will only need to be accepted. A final bee sound passes somewhere near enough to hear clearly, but far enough that it remains only what it has been from the beginning, a drifting thread in warm afternoon air. Then it is gone, and in the gentle hush that follows, with the orchard holding light and blossom and grass in their quiet balance, and one part of it already beginning to feel like the place where lying down might happen, the day opens into the first true possibility of rest. You go a little farther in among the orchard trees, and the place begins to change without ever becoming another kind of place entirely. The openness remains. That matters. The branches do not close over you. The rows do not tighten into anything like woodland. Light still has room to move between the trees, and the air still carries the wide, warm feeling of the afternoon beyond them. Yet from here, the orchard is no longer simply a pleasant edge of the day. It has begun to gather itself around you in gentler, more particular ways. One patch of grass lying flatter than another, one tree holding its shade more evenly, one small drift of sound lingering longer before falling quiet again. A bee passes somewhere to your right, not near your ear, not close enough to startle, only near enough to be heard as it crosses the warm air and then moves on. The sound does not remain after it has gone. It thins almost at once into the wider hush among the trees, and the body does not tense around it. That lesson is settling more firmly now. A bee may pass nearby, and nothing is required. Another may be farther off among the branches, and still nothing is required. The orchard contains this small life easily, and the body is beginning to understand that it can remain just as easy inside it. The grass underfoot has changed as well. At the edge of the orchard, it still felt touched by the outer day. Here, farther in, it feels more fully claimed by the trees. The blades are short and lightly springing, cool lower down where shade has rested longer, warmer at the tips where the sun still reaches in. One stretch gives a little more than the last. Another lies firmer where the earth beneath sits closer to the surface. Your steps register these differences without having to inspect them. The ground is no longer simply walked across. It is being learned. Somewhere ahead, bees can be heard more than seen, not in any concentrated cluster. Only a soft, shifting thread among leaves and blossom, present for a little while, then less distinct, then gone entirely. The sound belongs so naturally to the orchard that it never seems to begin in a sharp way. It only enters the edge of hearing already underway, as if you have arrived in the middle of something that does not mind whether you notice it or not. You move between two trees where the light falls in longer pieces. Here the shade is thinner, more open. Beyond them, another tree holds a denser patch beneath its branches, and the grass there appears darker and more even. A few pale petals remain caught among the greener blades, not enough to turn the ground decorative, only enough to show that the orchard is still quietly in bloom. The trunks themselves keep their own gentle variation, one straighter, one more bent near the base, one carrying its lower branch farther outward before turning up again. Nothing insists on being called beautiful. It is enough that everything belongs. A bee drifts across the space ahead of you, visible for just a second where the light catches it, then gone again among the leaves. The body does not follow. That may be the most important change in this block of the story. The bees are no longer simply heard and gone. They are beginning to teach the body a new kind of trust. Small life can move around you without drawing your attention into vigilance. Sound can cross the day and pass back out of it without becoming a vent. The orchard remains itself before the sound, during it, after it. And because of that, the body remains itself too. Slower now, quieter in the hands, no longer keeping a subtle reserve of readiness against what may pass nearby. The farther in you go, the more the orchard begins to divide itself into places that are for passing through and places that invite remaining. One patch of grass lies in brighter light and feels useful only as part of the way onward. Another, beneath a broader tree, seems to hold the afternoon differently, as though the warmth there has settled and stayed without pressing. A little farther off, one tree stands with a lower spread of branches that gathers shade into a broader shape. None of these differences declares itself at once. They accumulate. The orchard lets the body discover them gradually, the way it lets bee sound come and go in its own time. Your pace has eased again without asking permission to do so. The body no longer moves with the expectation of reaching a better place just beyond the next tree. It has started to understand that the orchard gives enough from one small section to the next. One stretch of grass, one little room of shade, one passing sound, one quieter interval after it. The day has become more local now, easier to inhabit in portions instead of as one broad field. A low hum holds somewhere to your left for a little while, not near enough to fix itself in one point, not far enough to vanish entirely. Just there, somewhere among blossom and leaves, as ordinary as the slight turning of a branch in the warmed air. Then even that soft thread begins to thin. The hum does not stop in any definite way. It only becomes less and less distinct until the orchard is once again composed of grass underfoot, shade laid lightly on the ground, and the mild held warmth of afternoon moving through the trees. That alternation matters. The bees are not a wall of sound. They do not fill the place completely. They pass, they recede, they disappear for a while, and that very irregularity is part of what makes them restful here. Nothing needs to be predicted. Nothing builds towards a peak. The orchard continues whether a bee is passing or not, and the body can continue inside it with the same unforced ease. You pass beneath a branch where the light is broken more finely for a moment, scattering small pale pieces across the grass before gathering itself again beyond. A few petals lie there, one caught against a darker blade, another resting on a patch where the ground is more worn and firm beneath. The slight sweetness in the air comes and goes the way the bee sound does. Never thick, never clinging, only faintly present when a breath happens to meet it in the right part of the orchard. What reaches you most is not scent in isolation, but the whole afternoon passing through leaf, blossom, grass, warmth, and sound, and becoming gentler as it does. Another bee passes nearer this time, then another farther away. One belongs to the space immediately around you for a second or two. The other belongs somewhere deeper among the trees. Then both are gone, and their going leaves the orchard more itself, not less. The stillness here is not the absence of movement. It is movement that has stopped making claims. You go on. The ground dips very slightly and rises again, enough that one footfall lands on a softer patch, and the next on one that feels steadier beneath the grass. The body accommodates this almost before awareness can form around it. The shoulders are quieter now. The face no longer carries the bright alertness of the outer day. Even the eyes have begun to move in a different way, not searching far ahead, only accepting what each next stretch of orchard offers. Ahead, one tree begins to hold the afternoon a little more convincingly than the others nearby. Not through size alone, not through beauty, only through a steadier balance of things. The shade beneath it lies broader. The grass below looks less interrupted. The branches hold light in a softer pattern, and when a bee sound passes through that part of the orchard, it seems to arrive and leave without disturbing the stillness there at all. You are not choosing it yet, but the body has started to register the way some places in the orchard receive the day more gently than others. You move past another tree whose shade is narrower, more broken, less settled on the ground. Then another where the grass seems springier, but brighter, more exposed. Then again your attention returns, without any formal act of deciding, to that steadier patch farther on. This is how the orchard begins to gather towards a resting place, not by announcing one perfect spot, but by letting one place continue to feel truer each time the eye and body pass over it. The bees continue in their drifting way. One can be heard only faintly now, somewhere beyond two rows of trees. Another seems to cross behind you and then vanish before it can be placed. The body does not sort them carefully. It no longer needs to. The orchard is starting to sound less like separate small passings and more like a living background, gentle enough that it does not disturb the stillness already growing in you. The bees do not disappear. They begin to lose their edges as events. You pass through one brighter interval where the sun reaches farther down and warms the grass more fully, then on into another patch where the shade holds longer and the green deepens. The body notices the difference at once, not as preference exactly, but as relation. One place for moving through, one place that might be stayed in. One place where the orchard still speaks a little too brightly. One place where it speaks lower, with less interruption. The steadier tree is nearer now. Its trunk is not old in the way the olive tree was old, but it has its own certainty. The bark is rougher in some places, smoother in others where light rests along it. A branch extends low enough to widen the shade below without making it heavy. The grass there looks less broken, less crossed by the brighter strips that mark the more open patches behind you. It is still only a possibility, yet the body is beginning to understand that rest, when it comes, will most likely happen there or somewhere very close to it. A bee drifts across the air between you and that tree, then away again. The sound is brief. The stillness after it is longer, and that proportion feels right. The orchard is teaching the body that passing life does not lessen calm here. It defines it. Each small drift of sound makes the quieter intervals after it feel more trustworthy. Each return of the bees proves again that the body can remain where it is, untroubled, while the day continues its own small motions around it. You slow a little more. The hands hang quiet. The breath no longer does anything except continue. The ground gives enough from one step to the next. There is no need to look far beyond the next tree now. The orchard has already narrowed itself to the scale of what matters. This grass, this shade, this passing bee sound, this patch farther on that seems to gather everything into a steadier form. A final low hum lingers somewhere ahead, then thins into nothing. The branches remain. The grass remains. The held warmth remains. And the place you are moving towards no longer feels like one option among many. It has begun to feel like the part of the orchard, where rest is waiting to become real. And there, with the bees no longer sounding like separate interruptions, but like the orchard continuing in its own harmless way, and with one patch of grass and shade beginning to feel quieter, and truer than the rest, the body reaches the point where searching starts to give way to approach. Now that the orchard has had time to gather itself around you, the place that had only seemed likely begins to feel exact. It does not announce itself in any sudden way. Nothing opens dramatically. No single shaft of light falls across it as though to mark it out. The tree you have been moving towards simply continues to receive the afternoon more gently than the others nearby. And because it continues to do so, the body begins to trust that quiet difference. Its branches spread wide enough to hold a broader patch of shade beneath them, but not so thickly that the ground below is darkened into stillness. Light still reaches through in softened pieces. Bee sound still drifts by now and then. The orchard remains alive here, only in a form that asks less of you. The grass below the tree lies more evenly than in the brighter patches you have passed through. Not perfect, not trimmed into neatness, only steadier. The short blades are thicker in some places, finer in others, but the whole patch keeps a gentle levelness that makes the eye rest on it without searching for a better shape just beyond. What had seemed merely one possibility among many now begins, through nothing more dramatic than repetition, to feel like the place the orchard has been bringing you towards all along. You come a little nearer. From here, the shade has its own balance. It is not the coolest patch in the orchard, nor the darkest. It is simply the one where the afternoon seems best held. The sun reaches in lightly through the branches and then withdraws again. One brighter piece lies over the grass near the edge, while the middle remains quieter, less crossed by sudden bands of light. A bee passes through that patch and on again without altering anything essential about it. The stillness remains after the sound has gone, and that, more than anything, begins to settle the question. The orchard does not need to stop being alive in order to become restful. That truth deepens here. A faint sweetness still lingers in the air, but only lightly, as though it has already passed through blossom and warmed leaf and moved on. The bees are no less present than before, yet here their passing seems to prove the calm rather than disturb it. One sound draws near and slips away. Another hovers somewhere farther off among the branches of another row, too soft to place exactly. Then there is only the grass, the shade, the tree, the held afternoon, and the body standing inside all of it without any wish to hurry the next moment. You pause without quite meaning to. The feet register the patch before the eyes finish with it. The grass has a slightly springing surface where the greener blades grow thicker, but underneath there is a firmness that keeps the whole place trustworthy. That is important. It does not feel wild or hidden as meadow grass would feel. It does not give too deeply. It does not tangle, nor does it feel dry and spare like the olive ground. It is orchard ground, tended only by the life of the place itself, softened at the surface, steadier below, receiving the foot with enough gentleness to make rest seem possible, and enough structure to make it believable. A few pale petals lie scattered among the blades. Not many, just enough to show that the season is still turning quietly around you. One has caught in a slightly thicker patch of grass. Another rests where the ground lies a little firmer below. A third has come down near the trunk and stayed there, almost hidden in the shade. They do not decorate the place. They simply belong to it. You take one step into the patch, then another. The body learns more from those two steps than the eye could have done from several moments of standing still. One section gives a little more softly at the surface, but settles quickly into the steadier ground beneath. Another is flatter from the start. Near the trunk, the grass is shorter and the shade more continuous. Slightly outward from that, the light reaches farther through and warms the upper blades. These are not large differences, but they matter. They begin to shape the patch into something that can be used, not just admired. The bees continue in their drifting way. One passes somewhere beyond the tree and is gone before the sound can sharpen. Another seems to cross behind you, then dissolves into the wider hush between rows. The orchard is proving itself again through that very ordinariness. Nothing here asks for defensive attention. Sound may pass, and the patch remains itself. Warmth may move lightly across the grass, and the patch remains itself. A petal may shift where it lies, and still the place goes on holding the afternoon in the same low, sufficient way. That is what makes the decision possible, not perfection, continuity. You let your gaze move over the patch once more, now from within it. The tree trunk stands close enough to lend the place a feeling of edge and shelter without pressing against it. The broader branch spread above means the shade arrives in longer pieces, steadier than elsewhere. The grass does not lie all one height, but it lies in one quiet field. What little unevenness there is belongs to the ground in a way the body can already understand. A blanket would sit well here. The head could come down near the broadest shade. The body could turn and lower without negotiating too much with what it met beneath it. That thought does not yet fully form in words. Its shape is enough. The blanket comes down in a single quiet movement. Its weight leaves your hands and falls across the grass with a softness the orchard ground receives easily. Then the fold opens and the fabric spreads wider, not lying completely flat at once, but settling enough to show how the patch beneath will hold it. The grass yields first, then the firmer ground below answers through it. One edge lands over a slightly springier section and rises a little before relaxing into place. Another lies flatter, where the earth sits steadier under the root's quieter reach. You lower a hand to one corner and ease it outward, not carefully, only enough to let the blanket open to its full width and settle into the shape the patch offers it. The effect is immediate. The grass is still there beneath, but the surface becomes calmer to the eye. The blanket does not replace the ground any more than the orchard replaces the day beyond it. It simply makes the meeting easier. The shorter blades still speak through the cloth. The slight spring at the surface remains. Yet the patch begins to gather into one clearer field, one that the body will later be able to read more simply when it lowers itself down. A bee passes nearby while your hand still rests on the blanket. The sound moves across the patch, then away again. Nothing changes. That may be the moment the body trusts the place most completely for the first time. The bee does not interrupt the resting place. It crosses through it and leaves it intact. The grass remains where it is. The shade remains where it is. The blanket lies over both, taking their shape without argument. Calm does not wait for stillness here. It survives motion easily. You smooth one fold near the middle, then another smaller one near the edge. That is enough. The blanket already understands the patch better than more arranging would help it to. Where the grass is thicker, the cloth rises a fraction before settling. Where the ground beneath is firmer, it lies close and quiet. A little farther in, one section remains very slightly softer to the eye, and another steadier. None of this looks troublesome. It simply means the blanket has not been laid on something abstract. It has been laid on orchard ground, and orchard ground, like the afternoon itself, has its own natural variation. From where you stand, the resting place has begun to take on a different quality. It is no longer merely part of the orchard. It is becoming the one human place inside it. The tree, the grass, the branch-held shade, the occasional bee sound moving through without claim, all of those remain exactly as they were. But with the blanket now lying over the patch, the body can begin to imagine itself there not as a visitor passing through, but as something that will soon be received. The head support is brought down next. A folded cardigan, lighter than a cushion, heavier than a cloth, enough to soften the first meeting without trying to imitate anything indoors. You bend and place it near the steadiest part of the patch, not too close to the trunk, not so far out that the more broken light will fall directly across the face. The blanket beneath is smoother there. The grass below seems flatter, the surface better balanced between spring and steadiness. The cardigan keeps its fold when you set it down. One edge is adjusted with the side of your hand. That is all it needs. This small act changes the feeling of the place more than the blanket did. The blanket made the patch usable. The folded support makes it personal. Now the orchard does not simply offer a resting ground. It offers the outline of where the body will lie, where the head will come down, where the afternoon will be received from stillness rather than standing. The change is quiet but total. You remain there for a moment, looking at what has been made. The branch shadow moves lightly across one corner of the blanket and slips away again. A petal has landed near the edge and remains where it fell. The cardigan rests in its chosen place without needing further attention. The tree holds the patch in its broad shade. A bee sounds for a moment somewhere beyond the next row, then is gone. All of it continues in exactly the right proportion. Enough life to keep the orchard real, enough steadiness to let the body trust what comes next. One hand comes down more slowly and rests on the blanket where the head will not be. The fabric is warm at the surface from the held afternoon air. Beneath that warmth, the grass still offers its slight, yielding spring, and under that the steadier ground answers in its own plain way. The surface is not smooth in the sense an indoor place would be smooth. It is better than that for this story. It is honest. It carries the truth of grass, then the truth of earth beneath, while the blanket quiets the smaller irregularities enough that the body can imagine settling into them instead of being disturbed by them. You let the weight of your hand increase a little. The blanket responds first, then the grass, then the firmer support below. That layered answer is exactly right. The patch does not need to persuade you. It only needs to be itself clearly enough that the body can stop searching elsewhere. Another bee passes somewhere above and to one side. Again, nothing in the resting place is broken by it. That sound, once it would have meant movement in the air. Now it means something subtler and more useful. Proof that the orchard can continue around your rest without making rest impossible. The bees drift by. The patch remains. The shade remains. The blanket remains. The body, still standing over the place, begins to understand that lying here will not require the afternoon to become simpler than it already is. That may be the final closure this block needs. Not silence, not perfection, only a place that remains sufficient while small life passes through it. You lift your hand and stand over the made resting place once more. Around you, the orchard is still open and lightly alive. There are other trees, other patches of shade, other stretches of grass where a blanket might, in theory, have been laid. But that thought has no force left in it. Comparison has thinned. The body has already stopped extending itself outward in search of improvement. The question is over. This tree, this blanket, this folded support, this grass and shade and held afternoon air. A final low bee sound drifts somewhere near enough to hear and far enough not to locate. Then it passes on, and the quiet after it feels larger than before. You do not need a better patch. You do not need another tree. You do not need to walk farther into the orchard to confirm what the body already knows. The resting place has been found. You stand for one last moment with the orchard gathered around the patch, and the patch gathered around the shape of where you will soon lie. The blanket lies quietly over the springing grass. The folded support waits where your head will come down. The shade holds steady enough above. The bees continue to drift by without claim. And there, with the orchard no longer offering possibilities, but one exact place where rest can happen, the body reaches the point where choosing is finished and lying down can begin. You begin to lower yourself into the orchard patch without breaking the quiet that has gathered there. One hand comes down first, touching the blanket where the cloth lies smoothest over the grass. The contact is immediate but layered. The fabric is warm at the surface from the held afternoon air. Beneath it, the grass gives lightly, not in any loose or wild way, only enough to let the hand know it has met something living before the steadier ground below makes itself known. The patch answers in order: cloth, then grass, then the firmer support underneath. It is a good answer. Plain enough to trust. Your knees bend. Weight leaves standing gradually and begins to pass through the arm that has found the blanket. Nothing in the movement feels ceremonial. It is only the ordinary, careful kindness a body gives itself when it is about to come down somewhere already half trusted. The orchard does not ask for special caution. It asks only that the body pay enough attention to meet what is there honestly. One knee follows. The blanket receives it first. Then the short grass yields a little beneath the cloth, and below that the steadier ground prevents the whole patch from sinking into softness. That layered support is immediately different from the olive grove's firmer truth and from meadow rest's deeper give. Here the first contact is springing, but not unstable. The patch offers softness at the surface and reliability beneath it. The body understands that difference almost before thought forms around it. Your other hand comes down as well, and for a few quiet seconds your weight is divided between hand, knee, hand, and foot. The body still partly vertical, partly committed to the ground, halfway between standing and rest. At this lower level, the patch changes character, not by becoming smaller, by becoming more exact. The grass no longer reads as one surface seen from above. It becomes many tiny contacts gathered into one field beneath the blanket. The tree is no longer one tree among others. It is the nearness of bark and branch shadow close beside you. The orchard beyond is still there, light between rows, a farther hush of leaves, the occasional bee drifting somewhere outside the immediate patch. But your attention is no longer spread through all of it equally. It has gathered around what is under your hands, and knee, around what is beginning to take your weight. A bee passes somewhere above and to one side. The sound crosses the air and is gone again. Nothing in you tightens against it. That, too, becomes part of the trust. The orchard does not need to fall silent for the body to lower itself here. Small life continues through the branches. A bee may pass nearby. Another may be somewhere farther off among blossom or leaves. And still the patch beneath you remains exactly what it was a moment before. Cloth over springing grass over steadier ground, patient enough to receive you without asking anything in return. You turn gradually towards the place that has already been made for lying down. The movement is small enough to feel like continuation rather than decision. One hip begins to descend. Weight shifts through the bracing arm and bent knee, then passes more fully into the side of the body as the blanket meets you first, and the grass beneath follows with its softer yielding. Below that, the firmer ground keeps the whole arrangement from becoming uncertain. The patch gives, but only at the surface. It is a kind of welcome, not an invitation to disappear into it. The side of the hip and the upper thigh are the first places to understand this clearly. One part of you meets a section where the grass is slightly thicker and springs a little before settling. Another finds the patch where the blanket lies flatter and the steadier ground answers more quickly beneath it. Neither condition is better in itself. Together they tell the body what sort of rest this will be. Not hard, not deeply cushioned, something in between, first a little yielding, then a broad plain holding. You lower farther. The longer line of the side body begins to come down in quiet stages. The waist meets the blanket next. Then the lower ribs draw closer, while one forearm still bears a little of the descent. The movement slows naturally here, not because the patch resists you, but because every body has a last few moments in which it reads the surface it is about to trust fully. The orchard patch offers its answer with unusual clarity. The upper layer remains lightly springing. The steadier support underneath remains constant. The body does not have to guess what it is meeting. A few blades of grass press upward through the cloth just enough to be known. Not sharply, only enough to keep the place real. The blanket has quieted the patch, but not erased it. You are not lying on an abstract softness. You are lowering yourself into orchard ground that has been made easier to meet. That distinction matters. The body trusts places more readily when they do not pretend to be something they are not. The tree remains just beyond the edge of contact. You do not touch it, and yet its presence matters. The trunk's nearness gives the patch an edge without enclosing it. Its branches hold the shade in a broader, steadier spread overhead. Even the air beside it feels slightly more settled, as though warmth and sound and light have been passing through this part of the orchard long enough to soften into one held condition. The tree is not holding you directly, but it is helping the whole place hold together. Another bee drifts by, this time farther off. The sound hovers for a moment among the branches, then thins into the orchard's wider hush. Again, nothing changes in the resting patch. That is becoming one of the deepest reassurances of the block. Rest does not depend on stopping the orchard. The bees may continue, the leaves may shift, a petal may move in the grass nearby. Yet the patch beneath the body keeps its own quiet promise. It remains sufficient through all of it. At last, the shoulder begins to descend. That is the moment when the body stops merely approaching rest and starts to enter it. The blanket softens the first meeting. The grass yields beneath that. Then the steadier support below receives the weight more fully. One shoulder finds a flatter section of the patch more directly than the hip did, while the side of the torso still registers the softer spring elsewhere. With that, the body's weight begins to spread. What had been a few separate points of contact becomes something broader and more continuous. The patch stops feeling like separate answers given under different parts of you and begins to feel like one place. Your head remains lifted for another moment while the hand nearest the folded support guides its lowering. Then the cloth receives it. It is only a folded cardigan, simple and practical, but in this moment it feels exactly right. Not because it imitates indoor comfort, because it does not. It offers a small lift, a little easing, a little plain separation between skull and earth. The back of the head settles. The fold keeps its shape. The neck follows. And with that one completion, the arrangement declares itself clearly enough to be trusted as a whole. Blanket over grass, grass over steadier ground, folded support under the head, branch held shade above. Bee sound occasionally crossing the orchard beyond without coming close enough to matter. For a few moments, though, you are not yet fully given over. One arm still takes a little weight. One knee remains slightly more bent than the other. The chest is not holding itself up exactly, but neither has it released its last trace of readiness. These seconds matter. They are not hesitation. They are the body's final reading of the place through contact rather than expectation. The elbow bears lightly into the blanket. The shoulder tests its angle without moving much. The side of the waist learns the difference between the patch's softer spring and its deeper steadiness. The longer leg begins to extend more fully along the cloth. Each small perception is absorbed almost at once, not turned into analysis, only folded into the body's growing certainty about where it is. A bee passes somewhere near enough to hear clearly while your head is just settling into the folded cloth. The sound crosses the upper edge of the patch and moves on. The body does not lose trust. That is the new thing this episode can do that the olive grove could not. There, rest deepened through stillness and shade and the soft loss of visual contrast. Here, rest deepens while the orchard continues to live around you. A small sound passes, then it is gone. The patch remains, the body remains. Calm survives movement and is proved by surviving it. You become aware, too, of how the warmth of the day has changed now that you are on the ground. Standing, it rested directly on shoulders, face, arms, and the upper body exposed to the orchard air. Here, it gathers differently. A mild held warmth remains in the blanket, in the grass at the surface, in the shaded air under the branches, and in your own skin from the day you carried in with you. Beneath that upper warmth, the deeper ground keeps another measure altogether, firmer, steadier, less touched by the passing changes above. The body lies between those two conditions, warmth around and over support below. Neither overstates itself. Together they make rest easier to understand. Then comes the one true adjustment the place requires. It is small, but decisive. The shoulder eases a fraction farther, and the arm beneath it shifts out from bearing the body's remaining caution so the chest can settle more openly. At almost the same moment, the knee that had stayed slightly gathered lengthens more fully along the blanket, letting the hip find a broader relation to the patch beneath it. The two movements belong together. They are not two separate corrections. They are one line of the body quietly aligning itself from shoulder through waist to thigh. When they are done, the change is unmistakable. Not dramatic, not transformed, only final. The body has found the position it was moving towards from the first moment the hand touched the blanket. After that, the arm no longer needs to support anything. It comes to rest easily, and with that release, something quiet passes through the rest of the body as well. The ribs stop hovering in their almost imperceptible way. The side of the waist no longer keeps back a fraction of its weight. The hip settles without holding itself in reserve. The head yields more honestly into the folded support. These are not fresh adjustments. They are the natural consequence of the one that mattered. The patch has moved from prepared to inhabited. The blanket answers the settled weight differently now than it did during the descent. Before, it was surface. Now it becomes continuity. The cloth no longer presents itself first as texture. It becomes the quiet layer through which the whole resting place is felt. Blanket, then grass, then steadier ground. Surface spring, then broad holding. The body no longer meets these as separate facts each time awareness touches them. It begins to feel them together as one support made of layers that have already settled their relations among themselves. Above, the leaves continue their faint turning. A softened shift of light passes along the lower part of one arm and across the blanket near your knees before moving on again. From lying here, that movement belongs to another order of experience than it did while you were walking. It is not something you pass through now. It is something that passes over the place holding you. The filtered light reaches the patch already quieted by leaf and branch and distance. Its motion feels less like change than like the orchard continuing in the only way it knows how. The tree beside you remains close enough to orient the body without asking to be looked at. It gives the patch an edge, but not a boundary. A near steadiness rather than enclosure. The body registers it in the same quiet way it registers the folded support under the head and the grass-softened ground below the blanket, not as an object demanding attention, but as one part of the arrangement that makes the whole place feel secure. Beyond the trunk, beyond the body, the orchard stays open and lightly alive, yet from here that openness has lost any relation to movement. It is simply the wider life of the place around you. One last trace of effort reveals itself only because there is now so little of it left. The chin settles a fraction differently. The hand nearest the blanket loosens, no longer shaped by readiness. The chest finds a calmer rhythm where the supported side beneath it has stopped requiring negotiation. No further improvement suggests itself. No part of you sends up a request to move again. The patch has said what kind of holding it offers, and it has offered it clearly enough that the body no longer has to test it. There is relief in that, though not the bright first relief of stepping into shade. This is lower and quieter. It is the relief of no longer being in conversation with the surface beneath you. The place has stopped being possibility. It has become fact. Blanket, grass, steadier ground, folded support, branch-held shade, passing B-sound beyond the edge of the patch. Each part has found its relation to the others. Nothing remains under review. A bee can still drift by. That matters now in a different way than it did before. It is no longer simply proof that the orchard is harmless. It is proof that the patch does not lose itself when life moves through the air around it. The sound passes, then the quiet after it returns. In both, the body remains exactly where it is. That is the real trust this block has earned. Nearer than the bee sound is the simpler language of contact. The blanket over the grass, the slight spring at the surface, the steadier holding below, the folded support under the head, the mild warmth in the shaded air, the tree's nearness at one side. These are the things nearest now, and because they are plain, they are also sufficient. The body understands this not through revelation, but through the uselessness of motion. Moving again would not improve anything. Another adjustment would only repeat what has already been learned. The blanket has taken the patch's shape. The grass and ground have proved themselves. The The support under the head lies exactly where it should, and the body, which always knows more about lying down than language can explain, finds there is nothing left to ask for. You lie beneath the orchard tree with your full weight given over at last. The shoulder does not hover. The hip does not search for another answer. The head carries none of itself. The arm nearest the blanket rests without purpose. The longer line of the body settles into its own quiet extension. Above, the filtered light continues in soft pieces. Around you, the orchard air remains mild and held. Somewhere beyond the patch, a bee may pass and pass on. Beneath you, the layered support of blanket, grass, and steadier ground receives everything without strain. And there, with the orchard still living gently around you, and the patch beneath you asking nothing more to be trusted, the body learns the clearest truth this place can offer, that it can be completely held without asking the afternoon to go still. Lying beneath the orchard tree, you begin to hear the bees differently from the way you heard them while walking. At first, they are still separate enough to be noticed one by one. A bee passes somewhere near the edge of the patch, its sound clear for a moment as it crosses the warm air, and then thins again into the wider orchard hush. A little later, another moves farther off, somewhere beyond the next row, less a single passing than a thread of sound briefly drawn through blossom and leaf before it fades. The body remains exactly where it is through both. The blanket does not change beneath you. The grass does not cease its slight spring at the surface. The deeper support below remains just as steady as before. That is becoming one of the orchard's clearest gifts. A sound may pass through it, and still the resting place stays whole. The bees do not unsettle the patch, they prove it. Each small drift of sound enters a place already sufficient and leaves it sufficient. The body does not brace, it does not prepare, it does not hold still in order to preserve the stillness. The stillness is already strong enough to survive passing life around it. Then there is no bee at all for a while. Only the blanket over the grass. Only the warm air lying lightly under the branches. Only the filtered light moving in small pieces overhead, and the orchard continuing without any need to declare how. That interval matters as much as the sound, perhaps more, because it teaches the body that the bees are not a pattern to be anticipated. They are not regular enough to count, and not near enough to command attention each time they pass. One may be heard clearly, then nothing, then another farther off, then another, so faint it is difficult to tell whether it came from beyond the tree above you or farther down the row where the orchard opens again towards the brighter afternoon. The body has less and less reason to prepare for any of it. A bee may drift through the air above the patch and be gone before the mind has done more than half notice it. Or there may be no sound, but the softer continuance of leaf shadow shifting across the grass and blanket. In either case, the orchard remains what it is. It does not sharpen with the sound, and it does not empty when the sound is gone. The patch beneath you remains exactly itself. The blanket still lies over the short grass in its quiet field. The surface still yields a little before the steadier ground answers beneath. The folded support under your head keeps its shape without drawing attention to itself. The tree remains close enough to lend the resting place an edge and a steadier shade. None of these truths depends on what is passing through the air above them. They hold through bee sound, through its absence, through the gentle changes of light that move between those two conditions. That continuity begins to alter the meaning of the sound itself. A bee passes near enough to hear clearly again, crossing from one side of the orchard to the other, but now it no longer feels like a separate occurrence in quite the same way. It still has a beginning. It still has a fading away, yet the body does not receive it as something newly arriving into the day. It feels more like the day continuing in one of its ordinary forms, no more disruptive than a brighter piece of light moving through the leaves and then becoming shade again. This is where the orchard begins to sound less like a collection of separate passings and more like one living field with soft variation inside it. The bees are part of that variation. So are the longer spaces between them. So is the branch shift overhead that changes the tone of the light on the blanket for a moment and then lets it settle again. So is the mild warmth held under the tree, never pressing, never disappearing, only remaining. Nothing in the orchard insists on a strong border between one passing state and the next. A farther hum lingers somewhere to your left for several moments. Not fixed, not concentrated enough to become a center. Only there, then less there, then gone. If you were still standing or walking, the mind might have sorted it more actively. This bee near, that one far, this cluster in blossom, that thread of sound beyond another row of trees. But lying here, with the patch already fully trusted, the need for that kind of sorting begins to thin. The body does not need the orchard mapped so precisely anymore. It is enough that the sound belongs to the place and does not ask anything from you. The intervals after the bees have a character of their own. They are not empty. They hold the orchard in another register. Warm grass beneath the blanket, the broad shade of the tree overhead, the occasional leaf turning in the air, and letting a softer piece of light move across one part of the resting place before drifting on. In those intervals, the memory of the bee sound remains not as a point of attention, but as proof that the stillness here is not made from the absence of life. It is made from life continuing gently enough that the body can remain undisturbed inside it. That difference matters deeply to the episode. You are not resting in a place that has gone silent for your sake. You are resting in a place that has gone on being itself until the need to answer it has thinned away. Another bee passes closer. The sound has a little more shape to it this time, a clearer line through the air before it narrows again and vanishes into the orchard beyond. Yet even this clearer passing does not bring the old sharpened attention with it. It is heard, then it is not. The body remains where it is. The patch remains where it is. The soft spring of the grass at the surface and the steadier support below continue to hold their relation without needing to be checked. The orchard is doing something subtle now. It is teaching the body that continuity does not have to mean sameness. Be sound, then no be sound. Softer light, then slightly brighter. A little warmth held in the upper air, then more shade under a branch as it settles differently. The patch beneath you receiving all of it without changing its essential character. This kind of continuance is gentler than repetition. It does not establish a pattern and ask the mind to anticipate its return. It only keeps offering the same harmless life in slightly different forms, until following each one separately starts to feel less useful than remaining where you are. The blanket, the grass, and the ground beneath them begin to take on that same quality. Earlier, the body still had reason to notice how the surface answered in layers. Cloth first, then short grass, then the steadier support underneath. That knowledge has not vanished, but it no longer rises each time attention touches the place where you lie. The patch has already proved itself. The body no longer re-asks the same question. That frees the orchard to become larger without feeling farther away. A bee can sound somewhere behind the trunk, and then the orchard is simply there again. Another can drift through the brighter air beyond the edge of the patch, and then the orchard is there again. The branch shadow can move lightly across one corner of the blanket, and then the orchard is there again. No part of this needs to be fixed in sequence. The day continues through such small changes without asking to be divided by them. The bees are helping to carry that continuity now more than anything else. Not because they are constant, because they are not. One comes and goes, then another does not come for some time. Then a low hum holds somewhere among the trees and thins before it can become important. Then there is only the mild air under the branches again. Irregularity is what makes them restful here. If they arrived in strict rhythm, the mind might begin to wait for them. If they swarmed too near, the body might prepare against them. Instead, they drift in the way thoughts do when they are almost no longer thoughts, passing lightly, not urgent enough to keep, not structured enough to demand attention, yet still part of the atmosphere through which rest deepens. A bee passes close enough now that the sound seems to cross directly above the blanket before moving on. The orchard remains. The patch remains. The body remains. The sound passes. Then there is only the larger held condition again. The body is beginning to need that sentence less in words because it is learning it through repetition without pattern. A sound comes. It does not disturb. A space follows. It does not empty. Another sound comes elsewhere. It too does not disturb. The orchard keeps teaching the same lesson without ever formalizing it. That lesson changes the shape of time, not by making time disappear, by making it harder to say where one small part of the afternoon ends and another begins. A bee passes. Was it a long while since the last one, or only a few moments? The branch shadow shifts on the grass beside the blanket. Has it moved much, or only enough to be noticed once and let go? The warmth in the air remains, but whether it is more or less than it was a little earlier matters less and less. The orchard does not offer moments in any sharp-edged way. It offers continuance with soft variation inside it. That may be why the body settles more deeply now without needing another adjustment. Nothing new is being required of it. The patch has already answered its physical questions. Now the orchard is answering the quieter question beneath those, whether rest can deepen while life continues around it. The answer has become yes. Yes, because the bees drift by, and still the patch remains intact. Yes, because the intervals after them are as full and harmless as the sound itself. Yes, because one low hum farther off and one nearer passing above the blanket belong equally to the orchard without demanding equal attention. Yes, because the body no longer needs to know which part of the orchard is sounding now in order to keep resting where it is. That last change is important. At the beginning of the episode, each bee sound entered the day as a distinct occurrence. Then, as the orchard was learned from inside, the sound became something ordinary and non-threatening. Now it begins to lose even its separateness. You can still hear it, of course, but the mind no longer receives each passing with the same border around it. A bee is near. Another is farther off. Or perhaps there is only a thread of sound somewhere among the branches that cannot quite be placed. The body does not care enough to sort which is which. The orchard is becoming one held field, blanket over grass, grass over ground, tree shade overhead, warm air held among branches, bee sound entering, crossing, thinning, intervals between those passings, light moving in soft pieces through all of it. At first, these can still be recognized separately. Then, little by little, they begin to belong to the same condition. This does not mean the bees vanish into the background completely. It means they no longer rise from it in the same way. They are still there, but each passing is less like a small event and more like a brief emphasis within something already whole. The orchard remains a living place. The body remains a resting body inside it. The distinction between what is passing and what is holding starts to matter less because both are proving equally harmless. A bee can sound somewhere just beyond the tree and be gone before the mind forms even a half turn towards it. The body does not withhold itself from the patch while that happens. The grass continues its slight spring at the surface. The blanket continues to quiet that spring into something more even. The ground beneath continues its plain support. The folded support beneath the head keeps its shape. The afternoon continues under the branches. What is the bee then, at this point in the episode? Less a sound to be placed than a way the orchard keeps declaring itself alive. Less a passing interruption than a thread woven in and out of the held stillness. Less a thing that arrives from outside than part of the same gentle field in which the body is already included. That is the shift this block needed to earn. A longer interval comes now without any bee at all. The orchard does not feel emptier for it. If anything, the hush between passings makes the next faint sound, when it eventually comes from somewhere beyond the next trees, feel more naturally part of the same afternoon rather than a return of something absent. The bees do not disappear and reappear in a dramatic sense. They drift in and out of perceptibility, and the body begins to rest within that uncertainty rather than trying to resolve it. By now, the orchard has become less a place where things happen and more a place where small, harmless changes continue. A bee nearer, then none, then one farther off, then leaf shadow shifting, then only warmth under the branches and the patch holding what has been given to it. No single one of these now seems worth lifting out from the rest and keeping separate for long. The body has no wish to move. The patch has no need to prove itself again. The orchard has no need to go quiet. All three of those truths now belong together. That is why the bees are no longer tracked sharply as near or far, one or many, now or then. Those distinctions still exist, but the usefulness of keeping them clear has begun to thin. It is enough that the orchard continues. It is enough that the patch remains. It is enough that the sound, when it comes, passes lightly and leaves no demand behind it. And there, with the bees no longer heard as separate small events, so much as part of the orchard's soft continuance, with the intervals after them growing as restful as the sounds themselves, and with the patch beneath the body and the life around it beginning to belong to one held condition, the afternoon reaches the edge of another quieter change, the point at which even sound can go on without needing to be followed. By now, the differences that once helped the body understand the orchard have begun to lose their value. They have not disappeared. The blanket is still the blanket. The grass is still the grass beneath it. The steadier ground still holds below that. The shaded air still rests under the tree. A bee may still drift somewhere near or farther off among the rows, but none of these now asks to be kept apart with the same care as before. The patch has already proved itself. The body no longer needs to sort each part in order to remain where it is. What remains is quieter than any earlier part of the afternoon, not another stage of settling, not another fresh deepening, only the slow thinning of the need to follow one small change from the next. Behind your closed eyes, the orchard has become simpler, not blank, not dark in any finished sense. Only a warm dimness with slight variation moving through it, too soft-edged to matter very much. Now and then something overhead shifts and that dimness alters by a degree too small to hold for long. A paler warmth passes through it, then the tone deepens again. Neither asks for interpretation. Neither invites the eyes to open and discover which branch moved or where the light has fallen now. The orchard no longer needs to be seen clearly in order to remain trustworthy. It is already there, held well enough to continue without explanation. A bee passes somewhere beyond the edge of the patch. The sound is heard, then not heard. That is all. There is no reason to decide whether it crossed from left to right, whether it came from the nearer branches or the next row beyond, whether another may follow soon after it or not. The sound belongs to the orchard in the same way the filtered light belongs to it, as part of a continuance that no longer depends on being broken into parts and named. Then there is no bee for a while, only the warm dimness behind the eyes, only the held air under the tree, only the blanket lying over the grass, and the steadier ground below carrying everything without strain. That interval matters no less than the sound itself. Perhaps it matters more now. It lets the orchard remain one thing. A bee may pass or not pass. A faint hum may form somewhere beyond the branches or not form. The orchard does not sharpen around those possibilities. It goes on in the same patient measure whether sound is present or absent in any given moment. The body no longer has any use for keeping those moments apart. That is the threshold, not that the bees have vanished, not that the orchard has gone still, only that the old habit of placing each passing thing has thinned beyond usefulness. Another soft drift of sound comes and goes. By the time it is gone, it has already ceased to feel like an event. It is no longer one bee, and then silence, one hum, and then stillness. It is simply the orchard continuing in one of its ordinary forms, then continuing in another. The patch beneath you does not need to defend its calm against any of it. The calm is broad enough to hold both the passing sound and the interval after it without changing its nature. The same is true of the light. A branch must shift somewhere above because the dimness behind your eyelids alters again, but the change is too slight to divide the afternoon cleanly into before and after. It is only another soft variation inside the same held field. What the orchard offers now is not sequence so much as continuance. Sound then no sound, slightly paler then deeper again, warmth held in the air, support held below, none of it worth sorting very long. The patch and the orchard no longer stand apart in the same way either. The blanket over the grass over the steadier ground, the shade under the tree, the bee sound passing now and then through the wider air, the dimness behind the eyes receiving all of it in simpler form. At first, these could be felt separately. Now they belong more quietly to one another, not because their differences have ceased to exist, but because those differences have stopped asking to be refreshed into awareness each time they are encountered. The resting place does not need to be protected from the orchard. It already belongs inside it. There is a kind of ease that comes only after even listening has become less exact. This is that ease. A bee may pass near enough to hear clearly, and before the mind has done anything with it, the sound is already gone again into the orchard's wider hush. Another may remain farther off, no more than a thread among the trees, or there may be no sound at all for some time. None of these conditions now rises strongly enough above the others to matter much. The orchard remains alive, but not in any way that requires witness. The body rests inside that unwitnessed continuance. No more than that is needed. The dimness behind the eyes grows less like dimness and more like one unbroken field. Warm dim, held, without edge worth naming. If the bees still drift through the orchard beyond the patch, they drift through it on their own terms. If the leaves keep shifting softly above, they keep shifting. If the broader day still rests somewhere past the denser shade in fuller brightness, it rests there without asking to be compared to this. The usefulness of all such distinctions has thinned almost completely away. Here, beneath the tree, there is only the steadiness that remains when the need to follow has fallen quiet. The orchard keeps the afternoon. The bees keep drifting by in their own harmless measure. The grass keeps its slight spring under the blanket. The ground keeps its plain support below. The shade keeps its held shape under the branches. There is no need to know which sound is near, which is far, or whether the last faint passing has already gone from hearing altogether. Those questions belong to a sharper wakefulness than the one now left to you. The tree stands. The resting place remains. The orchard continues in its slow and living way. And as the bees go on drifting through the warm afternoon air, without urgency, and without any need to be followed further, the orchard keeps holding the day while you drift past the point of needing to notice exactly how it does.